Every night, you spend roughly 8 hours in a state your conscious mind cannot defend. You already know you need to change how you think about money. You have said it to yourself. You may have written it down. You have repeated phrases in the mirror and meant them, at least in the moment. And then weeks passed. The number in your bank account stayed inside the same narrow range it always has. Not because you lacked effort, not because the words were wrong, because you were saying them at the wrong time to the part of your mind that is specifically built to reject them. Here is what nobody in that conversation ever told you. There is a 5-minute window every single night, right at the edge of sleep. In that window, the part of your brain that filters, argues, and protects your existing identity goes quiet. Not slowly quiet, structurally quiet. The gate opens, and what you place into your mind during that window does not get screened against who you currently believe you are. It gets installed directly, like writing to a hard drive when the operating system is offline. Most people fall asleep inside that window without knowing it exists. You are about to stop doing that. What you are going to hear in the pages ahead is not a new set of affirmations. It is not a visualization technique. It is a precise, repeatable method for using the mind's own nightly architecture. The goal is to replace a wealth identity built by accident with one you choose on purpose. The difference between who you are financially right now and who you are capable of becoming is not effort. It is not information. It is timing. And the clock opens tonight. Chapter 1. The Gatekeeper Who Never Sleeps. Every culture that has ever built something lasting has understood, at some level, that the mind humans walk around with during the day is not the deepest mind they possess. Ancient healers knew it. Storytellers encoded it in myth. Philosophers circled it with language that did not quite fit. The idea that a second, older layer of mind lies beneath the one you use to make decisions, write emails, and argue with yourself in traffic. That idea is not new. What is new is understanding precisely when that deeper layer is accessible. And more specifically, what happens every single night of your life when it opens. You are sitting with that question right now, perhaps without knowing it yet. The answer is not what the self-help world has been selling you. It is older, more mechanical, and far more reliable than anything involving a mirror and a set of sentences you do not believe. That mirror is exactly where this begins. Tobias was 28 and he was doing everything right. He had the book. He had the morning routine. He stood in his bathroom at 6:15 every morning looking at his own reflection under cheap fluorescent light, and he said the sentences out loud. I am someone who creates wealth easily. Money flows toward me naturally. I am financially free. He said them clearly. He said them with as much conviction as he could manufacture at 6 in the morning. He had been doing this for 4 months. Nothing moved. His account balance stayed where it was. His anxiety about money stayed where it was. And the strangest part, the part that bothered him most, was what he felt during those 60 seconds in the bathroom. He did not feel energized. He did not feel reprogrammed. He felt like a liar. A specific, low-grade feeling of fraudulence, arriving on schedule every morning, delivered by his own voice. Here is the question Tobias could not answer, and the one this entire chapter is built around. Why did a man smart enough to research, commit to, and consistently execute a daily practice end up feeling worse about his financial identity than when he started? Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first you need to understand something about the architecture of the mind you are working with. Picture the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not emotionally, not financially, just think about what you believed about yourself and money. Think about how automatic those beliefs felt. Not chosen. Not installed by any single moment you can point to. Just there, the way your accent is just there, the way your handwriting is just there. You did not decide to feel the way you feel when a bill arrives. You did not choose the specific tightness in your chest when someone mentions investing. That response was built by a process that happened mostly without your awareness, mostly before you had the vocabulary to question it, and mostly below the layer of mind you use when you are trying to change. That layer below, that is what affirmations miss. Your conscious mind is not a programmer. This is the thing nobody explains clearly, so let it land completely. Your conscious mind is a gatekeeper. It evaluates incoming information and sorts it against what already exists. It does not install new beliefs. It compares. It checks. It runs a fast, ruthless consistency audit against everything you already hold to be true about yourself. And when something fails that audit, it gets flagged and turned away at the door. When 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 said, "I am someone who creates wealth easily," his gatekeeper did not receive that sentence as instruction. It received it as a claim. Then it checked the claim against the evidence on file. The evidence on file said, checking account with $400 in it, credit card with a balance that had not moved in 2 years, a job that paid enough to stay uncomfortable but not enough to feel safe. The gatekeeper looked at the claim. It looked at the evidence. It did the math in about 1/3 of a second. Rejected. That feeling of fraudulence 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 felt every morning. That was not failure of willpower. That was the gatekeeper doing its job at full efficiency. The more intelligent you are, the faster this process happens. The more self-aware you are, the harder this wall is to climb. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was not broken. He was running a sophisticated, high-speed rejection system that was working exactly as designed. The problem is not the affirmation. The problem is the timing. Consider a man named Marcus, who managed a small warehouse on the edge of a city that had seen better decades. Marcus was not a philosopher. He was not reading books about the mind. But Marcus noticed something about the workers on the overnight shift. During the day, getting anyone to learn a new system was slow work. People pushed back. They had habits. They had opinions about how things should be done. But in that specific window just before the end of the overnight shift, when exhaustion had worn everyone down and the resistance was simply gone, that was when he could introduce a new process and it would stick. The workers were not semi-conscious. They were functional, but the argumentative, protective layer had softened. They listened differently. And what they learned in that window, they kept. Marcus did not know he was observing neuroscience, but he was. There is a state your brain passes through twice every day. Once as you fall asleep, once as you rise from sleep. Researchers have a clinical name for it, but the name is less important than what the state actually means for you. It is the 30 seconds to 5 minutes during which the prefrontal cortex, the seat of your gatekeeper, begins to reduce activity. The critical filter that evaluates, compares, and rejects begins to step back, and in that window, the deeper mind is not asleep. It is awake, it is receptive, and the gate is open. Every night of your life, the gatekeeper takes a break. Most people spend that window scrolling a phone, rehearsing tomorrow's arguments, or cycling through the day's leftover anxieties. The window opens. They feed it noise. It closes. And the identity installed in the deep mind stays exactly where it was. This is the reason affirmations feel hollow. Not because the concept of self-belief is wrong, not because you are doing them wrong, but because you are doing them at the wrong time, against the wrong kind of resistance, using the wrong part of your mind as the delivery mechanism. You are pushing on a wall that was specifically built to resist exactly that kind of push. Every morning, fresh and alert at the mirror, your gatekeeper is fully operational. It is at peak strength. You are trying to install a new identity at the exact moment the installation window is closed. Soon, you will run into an idea about willpower and self-discipline that breaks with the story most people inherited. After that clicks, it starts changing how you approach every goal you currently have. But right now, one thing needs to be completely clear before this chapter ends. Identity does not change through aspiration. It changes through installation. Aspiration is conscious. It lives in goals, in affirmations, in vision boards and morning mantras. It feels like effort because it is effort, constant, repeated effort pushing against a wall that pushes back just as hard. Installation is different. Installation happens below the layer of comparison and rejection. It happens when the gatekeeper has stepped aside. It happens on a neurological level, through repetition during specific states of low cortical arousal, states that are available to you for free every single night, at the exact moment between wakefulness and sleep. Tobias eventually stopped doing affirmations in the bathroom, not because he gave up, because he found a better door, one that was not locked, one that no amount of conscious effort or willpower had ever needed to force open, because it opened on its own, on a schedule without being asked. The question is not whether you have access to that door. You do every night. The question is whether you know what to do when it opens. The conscious mind guards the identity you already have, and the only way to change what it guards is to go when it is not watching. Chapter 2. Your wealth identity was written while you slept. Sleep is not rest. That is what most people believe. Almost every person you know holds this idea somewhere in the back of their mind, that sleep is the body's off switch, the nightly maintenance window, the pause between productive hours. They are wrong, not partially wrong. The core of that belief is backwards. Sleep is the most active thing your brain does. The financial identity you are currently living inside was built, brick by brick, during hours that looked exactly like rest. Nobody told you this because nobody in your life knew it either. But once you see how the installation happened, you will immediately understand why changing it has felt like pushing against a wall made of something you cannot name. This chapter is about what that wall is made of. And more importantly, it is about the door that was used to build it, a door that opens again every single night. The last chapter left you with a specific idea. The conscious mind guards the identity you already have. The only way to change what it guards is to go when it is not watching. That sentence probably landed with some weight, but now you need to understand what identity it is guarding and where that identity came from in the first place. You did not choose it. Revisit the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not physically, not geographically, financially, in your mind. What number felt normal when you thought about your bank account? What did money feel like? Did it feel like water always flowing past you before you could hold it? Did it feel like a reward that went to other people, people who were luckier, sharper, born into something you were not? Now go back further, not 3 years, go back to 8 years old. Somewhere in that child's daily experience, a story about money was being written, and you were not the author. This part turns on one question the whole way through. Hold it as you listen. If the identity was installed before you had any choice in the matter, why has every conscious effort to change it produced such small results? Keep that question close. You will have the full answer before this chapter is done. Between the ages of roughly 2 and 7, your brain operated in a state that neuroscientists label theta. Theta is the brain wave frequency most associated with deep relaxation, creative absorption, and the hypnagogic window, that floating space at the edge of sleep where the filtering mind goes quiet. In an adult, reaching theta requires deliberate practice, or those specific minutes before you lose consciousness each night. In a child, theta is the default. It is not a special state. It is Tuesday afternoon. What this means, practically, is that a young child has no real filter between incoming information and stored identity. There is no guardian at the gate. The gate is simply open, all day, every day, for years. Whatever is said in that child's presence about money, about work, about who deserves comfort and who has to struggle, does not get evaluated. It gets installed, direct, unquestioned, filed under the category of how things are. Consider a child named Marcus. He is 6 years old, sitting at a kitchen table on a Sunday morning. The adults around him are talking the way adults talk when they think no one small is listening. His father says, in a voice that carries no drama but all the weight of belief, that people like them do not end up with money because money follows connections, and they do not have connections. His mother does not argue. She nods and pours more coffee. Marcus does not understand the word connections. He does not mentally record this as a belief about class or social capital. He simply files it as reality. The same way he filed the color of the walls or the smell of that kitchen. It becomes part of the furniture of his mind. He is 29 now. He works harder than most people he knows. He has read the books. He has set the goals. But every time he gets close to a real financial advance, something in him finds a reason to slow down, to doubt, to hold back. He cannot say why. He just knows the wall is there. Marcus does not remember that Sunday morning. He does not have to. The belief does not live in memory. It lives in identity. That is the mechanism, and it is not unique to Marcus. Your own gate was open in exactly the same way. The specific content that passed through it was different, your kitchen, your adults, your particular version of the story, but the architecture is the same. Theta did not discriminate. It accepted everything you were handed during those years. It filed it at a level deeper than opinion, deeper than preference, deeper even than belief in the way adults use that word. It became a structural assumption. A lens so fundamental you do not see it, because you see everything else through it. This is why affirmations feel hollow to so many people. Not because positive thinking is useless, because you are applying it at the wrong level of the system. You are speaking to a guard who was trained decades ago, using language he has already categorized as suspect. The guard has a job. His job is to protect the identity he was given. He is very good at his job, and he did not choose the identity any more than you did. But here is where this stops being a diagnosis and starts being a door. The gate that was open during childhood was a theta gate. Sustained, ambient, always on theta. And while you cannot go back to being 7 years old, the theta gate does not stay permanently closed after childhood ends. It opens again, every night, reliably, predictably. As your brain descends from full waking consciousness down into sleep, it passes back through that same frequency for somewhere between 4 and 10 minutes. The same channel that childhood ran through for years becomes briefly available again in that in-between space. The hypnagogic window. This is the contradiction most people miss entirely. They spend their days trying to force a new financial identity through a gate that is defended, guarded, and fortified. They push harder. They use louder affirmations. They write more goals. And the guard, who is very competent, deflects all of it. Then at night, without realizing what they are surrendering, they fall asleep passively, randomly, with the gate swinging open and nothing deliberate sent through it. They are handing back the one daily opportunity to do exactly what childhood did, install at the root level, not the surface. Later on, you will run into an idea about willpower and financial change that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once you grasp that turn, it starts changing how you act. For now, hold this. The programming you are fighting was installed when your gate was open. The gate opens again every night. That is not a metaphor. That is a description of a biological window, one that appears on schedule, lasts a specific number of minutes, and accepts input at precisely the level where your current wealth identity lives. The question you have been holding since the opening of this chapter, why has every conscious effort produced such small results, has its answer here. Conscious effort operates above the gate. It operates in the defended territory. Everything you have tried, everything that has felt like work, like pushing uphill, like fighting your own nature, has been happening on the wrong side of the wall. Not because you are doing it wrong, because the installation point is on the other side, and the only way to reach it is to use the same frequency that was used on you. Think about what that means. Really sit with it. The entry point for the original program is the same entry point you have available every night going forward. That is not poetic symmetry. That is practical leverage. It means the system that seemed to work against you contains its own correction mechanism, if you know when the door opens, and you know what to put through it. Marcus eventually learned this. He did not unlearn what his father said. He did not dig up the memory or process the belief in a therapist's office. He simply started using the window. He started placing one specific financial identity statement into his mind during the 4 minutes before he lost consciousness each night. Not a wish, not a request, a stated fact about who he was, repeated in the theta window with the guard already stepping away from the door. Within 8 months, his relationship with money had reorganized in ways he could not fully explain but could not deny. He did not connect the dots immediately, but you are connecting them now. In real time. The wealth identity you carry was not a decision. It was an installation, and the gate used to install it opens again tonight. The question is, what are you going to send through it? Chapter 3. The brain has a 5-minute open window nightly. Trying harder to reprogram your mind is exactly what keeps it locked. That sounds like an excuse to stop putting in effort. It is not. It is an observation about how the brain actually processes identity. And the moment you understand the mechanism, you will see that all the straining and repeating and forcing you have been doing was aimed at a door that was never going to open from that angle. There is another door. It opens every single night without effort, without permission, and almost always without you noticing. This chapter is about that door. What it is, what it does, and why everything you want to install in yourself must go through it, not around it. That question did not disappear when the chapter ended. What are you going to send through it? Before you can answer that honestly, you need to understand what it actually is. Not as a metaphor, as a real, measurable, neurological event that happens in your body every night, reliably like a tide. Here is what almost no one thinks about when they think about sleep. The transition into sleep is not a single step. It is a corridor. And inside that corridor, something specific and extraordinary happens to the filtering system that normally guards your beliefs about who you are and what you deserve. That filtering system has a name you have already heard in this book: the gatekeeper. You know it mostly as an obstacle, but here is the thing about the gatekeeper that changes everything. It does not just block, it also sleeps. Every night around the time your eyelids stop fighting, the gatekeeper begins to go offline. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a radio station loses its signal as you drive out of range. First the sharp edges soften. Then the internal argument quiets. Then the voice that says, "That is not realistic, and people like you do not end up like that." That voice gets very far away. And for approximately 4 to 7 minutes, depending on the night and the person, the path between your conscious awareness and the subconscious layer where identity actually lives is wide open, unguarded, receptive in a way it almost never is during waking hours. Scientists have a name for this corridor: hypnagogia. Say it slowly and it almost describes itself. It means the state that leads you into sleep. But the name matters far less than the sensation, because you already know this state. You have been in it hundreds of times. You just did not know what was happening or what it was worth. Think back to a night when you were genuinely tired. You were lying down, eyes closed. At some point the thoughts stopped being thoughts and started being something closer to pictures. Loose, strange, quick images that felt half invented and half received. A face you did not quite recognize. A room that was somehow 2 rooms at once. Colors that had no reason to be there. And then the fall. That brief sensation of dropping, sometimes enough to jerk you back awake. That is the threshold. That is the edge of the window. And if you have ever had a voice speak to you out of nowhere in that state, a single clear sentence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than your own thoughts, you have already touched what we are going to learn to work with. This is hypnagogia. Not mystical, not invented, documented in sleep research going back more than a century, measurable through electroencephalogram readings that show your brain waves slowing in real time as you descend through the corridor. Here is the science in plain language. When you are wide awake and going about your day, your brain operates primarily in beta frequency. Fast, active, analytical. This is the frequency of problem solving, of social navigation, of the internal editor that filters everything you think and hear against what it already believes to be true. Beta is the home frequency of the gatekeeper. It is also the frequency at which affirmations and visualizations are most commonly practiced, and it is precisely why those practices so often produce nothing lasting. You are speaking into a filter. The filter processes, evaluates, and usually rejects anything that does not match existing programming. As you relax and close your eyes, the brain slows toward alpha. This is the frequency of calm alertness, of daydreaming, of that loose and pleasant state you reach in a warm shower when ideas come easily. The gatekeeper is still present in alpha, but it is less rigid. Things get through that would not get through in beta. Then, if you continue to relax, you descend into theta. Theta is the frequency of deep meditation, of creative breakthroughs, and of hypnosis. It is also the dominant brainwave frequency of children under the age of 6. That is not a coincidence. That early childhood window is exactly when the foundational beliefs about safety, scarcity, worthiness, and money were first installed in you, without your consent, without your evaluation, directly into the subconscious because the gatekeeper had not yet fully formed. Theta is also the frequency of hypnagogia. Think about what that means. Every night, your brain passes through the very frequency at which your earliest, deepest beliefs were written. And it does not just pass through it. It lingers there briefly and reliably in a state of open receptivity before descending into full sleep. The gate does not slam shut at sleep. It swings open on the way there. Now pause here for a moment. Call up the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Think about the beliefs you were carrying then about money, about what was possible for you, about whether people with your background, your education, your particular history of mistakes and missed chances, whether people like that ever really changed their financial position in any lasting way. Did those beliefs come from evidence? Or did they arrive in you from somewhere else, installed before you were old enough to question them, reinforced so many times they became invisible? Most of what you believe about money is not yours. It was placed there. And because it was placed there through a process that bypassed conscious evaluation, it cannot be removed by conscious evaluation alone. You cannot argue your way out of a belief that was never argued into you in the first place. This is the problem that every approach to financial self-improvement eventually hits, and almost none of them address it directly. You can build better habits on top of a broken identity and get some results for a while, but the foundation pulls you back, not because you are weak or undisciplined, because the subconscious does not respond to willpower. It responds to repetition, emotion, imagery, and the particular vulnerability of the theta state. Here is a woman named Carla. She was 31, working a stable government job that paid enough to survive and not quite enough to breathe. She had read the books. She had written the goals down. She had said the words every morning in the mirror, the kind of words people say when they are trying to feel different about money. None of it moved the needle, not because she was not sincere. She was extraordinarily sincere. The problem was that every affirmation she spoke in the bathroom at 7 in the morning was being received by a brain in full beta, processed by a gatekeeper that had been on duty since childhood, and quietly rejected within seconds. The rejection did not feel like rejection. It just felt like nothing. The words bounced off. She thought she was not believing hard enough. She tried harder. The words bounced off again. Then Carla did something small and specific. Instead of practicing in the morning, she started practicing in the corridor, right at the edge of sleep. No forcing, no straining, no repetition in the beta voice. Just one clear image, held softly as the thoughts began to dissolve into pictures. The image of herself with a particular number in her account, not strained toward. Simply present, the way a dream is present, received rather than generated. 8 weeks later, she could not point to a single dramatic event. What she could point to was a pattern of decisions that had quietly shifted. She had asked for a rate increase on a freelance project she had been too afraid to price correctly. She had said no to a financial obligation that was not hers to carry. She had moved a small amount into savings and felt, for the first time, that it belonged there. The number in the account was not yet the one she had imagined, but the behavior had changed, and behavior sustained becomes circumstance. The 5-minute window did not give Carla something external. It updated the internal instruction set, and the instruction set updated changed every small decision that followed. This is the mechanism that the rest of this book is built on. Not magic, not wishful thinking about the universe delivering things to passive people. A precise, neurological window, accessible nightly, during which the filter that normally blocks identity-level reprogramming is temporarily offline, and the subconscious is receptive in a way it almost never is while you are awake. Earlier in this chapter, you heard a question that has not yet been fully answered. What are you going to send through it? You now understand the window. You understand why it works, but you do not yet know what specifically to send, and more importantly, you do not know the one mistake that turns this window from an asset into a liability, reinforcing the wrong identity instead of the right one. Most people who discover this state accidentally send exactly the wrong thing through it every single night and wonder why nothing changes. That is what the next chapter is about. But carry this forward. The gatekeeper that has been blocking you does not work overnight shifts. Every night, right at the edge of sleep, it goes quiet. The window opens, and whatever is present in your mind at that precise moment, whatever image, whatever feeling, whatever quiet conviction about who you are and what you are worth, that is what gets written in. What will you bring to the window tonight? Chapter 4. Theta is the language the subconscious reads. Right now, tonight, something is being written into you, not by your choices, not by your ambitions, by the 12 minutes surrounding sleep and whatever happens to be running through your mind during them. You are not a passive sleeper. You are an active recorder. The question that should make you stop is this: what has been recording night after night for the past decade? Whatever it has been, it is already installed. It is already shaping the decisions you make before you are even aware you are making them. The wealth identity you carry right now was not chosen in any morning routine moment of clarity. It was written during unguarded hours, quietly, in a state most people pass through without knowing it existed. That state has a name. It has a mechanism. And once you understand exactly how it works, tonight will be a different night than every night that came before it. That is the promise of this chapter. Not a concept, a mechanism, one you can use. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was 31 years old. He had spent the better part of 2 years convinced that his problem was strategy. He had read the books, tracked his spending down to the dollar, set the alerts on his banking app. But every time he approached a certain income level, something pulled him back. Not bad luck exactly. Decisions that felt reasonable in the moment, but, in hindsight, looked like someone who did not believe he deserved to stay there. He would price his work lower than it was worth. He would hesitate at the moment of asking. He would choose safety over the slightly riskier opportunity that might have paid 3 times as much. He did not know why. He just knew the ceiling was real. One night, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 fell asleep on his couch reading about his grandfather, who had emigrated with $40 and a borrowed suitcase. He had been tracing old letters, the kind written in faded ink, carrying the specific weight of a man who expected life to be hard. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 fell asleep with that image still open in his mind. He did not have a dramatic dream. What he had was a moment right at the edge where his grandfather's handwriting seemed to speak directly to him, not in words he could repeat, in a feeling. The feeling was, money is what you sacrifice for, not what you receive. He floated through it, came out the other side into sleep, and in the morning he could barely remember it. What he did notice was smaller than a revelation. When his first client of the day mentioned the project budget, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 said a number that was 30% higher than the one he had planned, and the client said yes. He did not connect those two events. Not yet. But something had shifted in the night, in that unguarded window between waking and sleep, and it had moved without asking his permission. Here is where the science becomes necessary. What happened to 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was not mystical. It was neurological. Your brain does not operate at one frequency. It operates across a spectrum. Where it sits on that spectrum determines what your mind will and will not accept as true. During your waking hours, when you are alert, solving problems, navigating social situations, your brain runs primarily in beta. Beta is the frequency of analysis, of critical evaluation. of the filter that says, wait, is this actually true? Is this actually me? Beta is where affirmations go to die. You repeat the words and something underneath immediately argues back. You say, I am wealthy, and the counter fires without hesitation. Then why is the account balance what it is? Beta does not accept what contradicts existing evidence. That is its job. As you relax, that frequency slows. It moves into alpha. Alpha is daydream territory. The pleasant loosening after a good meal, the calm of a Sunday afternoon. Still conscious, still capable of reasoning, but softer at the edges. Then comes theta. Theta is what your brain produces during those final minutes of drifting. The minutes where you are not quite asleep and not quite awake, where images arrive without being summoned, where your name, spoken softly, would still rouse you, but a car passing outside no longer registers. Theta is 4 to 8 cycles per second of electrical activity in the brain, and in that range, something remarkable happens. The critical filter goes quiet, not disabled, quiet. The gate between your conscious evaluation and your deeper belief system, the gatekeeper that has spent your entire adult life protecting your existing identity from revision, it does not slam shut. It simply stops standing at attention. It rests. And in that rest, input travels differently. It does not get interrogated. It does not get weighed against existing evidence. It arrives at the level of assumption, the level where your most fundamental beliefs about what is possible for you actually live. This is why early childhood is so formative. Children spend enormous portions of their day in theta. Their brains are not yet running at adult beta frequencies. They do not have the critical apparatus to evaluate what they are being told about money, about worth, about what people like them receive from the world. So those messages install directly, without debate. They become the architecture of identity that the adult version of you will spend years trying to consciously argue against, with very little success, because you are using a beta frequency tool to fight a theta frequency installation. Bring to mind the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it, not geographically, internally. Were there beliefs you carried about money that you could feel but not explain? Things like, people like me do not end up wealthy, or wanting too much is dangerous, or something always goes wrong right before the breakthrough. Where did those beliefs come from? You did not choose them. You did not sit down one afternoon and reason your way into them. They were installed when the gate was open, when you were young, or when you were in a state that resembled the mind of a child. Theta is not a new invention. It is how you were originally written. This is also why hypnosis works when nothing else seems to. A skilled hypnotherapist does not teach you new ideas. What they do is guide your brain into a state resembling theta, then deliver suggestion at a depth where the critical filter has stepped aside. The effectiveness of hypnosis is not a matter of belief in the technique. It is a matter of brain state. Some people are more naturally susceptible, meaning they enter theta more readily. But everyone enters theta, every single night, automatically, without needing a practitioner in the room. You are already doing it. The question is only what goes in during those minutes. Because here is what most people do not realize. And this is the thing 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 eventually understood when he traced back that morning of the unexpected number. The hypnagogic window does not only receive neutral content. It receives whatever is most emotionally charged in your awareness at the moment the gate opens. For most people, that is the residue of the day, the anxiety about the bill, the replay of the argument, the quiet hum of I am not making enough progress. That material, emotionally weighted and unchallenged, passes through the open gate and settles into the belief system like sediment. Night after night, decade after decade, You did not fall behind because of your decisions alone. You fell behind because of what was being installed while you slept, in a language you did not know you were reading, in a state you did not know you were in. That is the loss, and it has been compounding since the first night you went to sleep without knowing this. But the gate opens in both directions. If emotionally charged content goes through regardless, then the only variable is what that content is. You do not need to force belief. You do not need to override the critical mind by arguing with it. You need to arrive at the window carrying something different, something specific, something that carries the felt weight of an identity already inhabited, not an aspiration not yet reached. Because theta does not process hope. Theta processes now. It writes what feels real in that drifting moment as if it were already true, and in doing so, it begins to make it true at the level that matters most. The level of automatic behavior, of intuition, of the split-second decisions that determine whether you ask for the number or quietly settle for less. Tobias did not engineer his breakthrough. He stumbled through the gate by accident, carrying an image that rewrote one small reflex. But you do not have to stumble. As this book keeps moving, you will run into an idea about visualization that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that point settles, it starts changing exactly what you bring to the window each night. For now, understand this. Theta is not a relaxed state. Relaxed is alpha. Theta is something different in kind, not degree. Theta is the state in which your brain stops being a judge and starts being a recorder. It is the one window in your day when the gatekeeper rests, when the identity you carry is not defended, not reinforced, not argued for. It is simply open, waiting for instruction. You have been passing through that window every night of your life. What changes now is that you will stop passing through it with empty hands. Chapter 5. What you feed the window determines the identity. Trying harder is not what changes a financial identity. That sounds like the kind of thing someone tells you when they want you to settle. It is not. It is a structural observation about how the brain installs belief. Once you see the mechanism, the entire idea of working harder on your mindset during the day begins to look like the wrong tool applied to the wrong door. The door you need is not open during the day. It opens at night, in that narrow corridor between waking and sleep. What you carry through it gets installed whether you chose it deliberately or not. That last part is the one most people miss entirely. They assume the default is neutral. It is not. The default is whatever you were thinking about for the last hour before your eyes closed. For most people who feel financially stuck, that content is a precise catalog of everything they do not have and everything they fear. This chapter is about what happens when you understand that the window installs on both sides, and you decide which side you are going to feed. You know the feeling. The day ends and you are not done thinking. Bills that did not resolve, numbers that did not add up, a conversation at work that went a direction you did not want. You lie down and your mind keeps running. Not creatively, not productively, just circling, the same balance, the same calculation, the same low-frequency hum of worry that has been running underneath your day like a motor you forgot to turn off. Most people think this is just stress. Most people think it passes. What actually happens during that window, the hypnagogic state you have now come to recognize as the open gate between your conscious mind and everything beneath it, is that all of that circling gets amplified and delivered directly. Here is the open question this chapter will sit with for a while. If the window installs whatever is present and the brain does not distinguish between what you chose and what simply arrived, what has been installed in you over the last 5 years of falling asleep the same way you fell asleep last night, You do not need to answer that yet. Hold it. Think about the last time you genuinely let yourself rest without solving anything. Not meditation, not a podcast, not scrolling until your eyes quit. Just rest with a quiet and specific sense of who you are becoming. If that moment is hard to locate, you are not unusual. Most people in their 20s and early 30s have not been taught that this specific interval has a function beyond fatigue management. They were not taught because the people who taught them did not know either. The information existed in laboratories and in the margins of sleep research papers, not in the conversations most families have around money. So the default ran. And the default was not kind. There is a woman named Claudia who worked the closing shift at a bakery for 3 years, not because she loved the hours, but because the pay was slightly better and she was trying to erase a debt that felt permanent. Every night she came home after midnight, too tired to eat properly, too wired to sleep immediately. She would sit at the kitchen table and go through her phone, checking her bank balance, running the math on what she owed, estimating how many more months it would take. Then she would go to bed. She did this for 31 months, and in 31 months, despite working harder than almost anyone she knew, the number barely moved. Not because she was careless, not because she lacked effort. Because every single night, in the most receptive state her brain would enter in a 24-hour cycle, she was installing a precise picture of shortage. She was feeding the window a portrait of herself as someone who was always behind, always calculating, always insufficient. And the window, neutral and obedient, delivered that portrait into the layer of mind where identity lives. The window does not care what you want. That is worth sitting with for a moment. It only cares what is present. Think of it as an amplifier with no editorial function. You walk up to it carrying anxiety, and it amplifies anxiety. You walk up to it carrying a clear, felt sense of who you are becoming, and it amplifies that. The mechanism is identical. The outcome depends entirely on what you bring. This is what was meant at the end of the last chapter by the idea that you will stop passing through the window with empty hands. Because empty hands are not actually what most people bring. They bring something. They bring the content of the day. And the content of most financially stressed days is a very detailed, emotionally charged, neurologically potent case for why things are not working. That emotional charge is not incidental. It is part of why the installation goes deep. The hypnagogic state amplifies material that carries emotional weight. A dry thought about your rent check does not carry weight. But a tightening in the chest when you see your balance, the particular sick feeling of knowing you will have to say no to something again, that carries enormous weight. That is exactly the kind of content that burns in. The brain's memory and identity systems do not flag emotionally neutral material as important. They flag whatever arrives with intensity. And worry, at the edge of sleep, arrives with tremendous intensity. This is the mechanism that has been running without your permission. Now look at what changes when you bring something different. A man named Donovan spent 8 months working with a very specific pre-sleep practice. He was not a guru. He was not wealthy. He was a logistics coordinator who had read enough to understand that the minutes before sleep were structurally different from other minutes. He did not recite affirmations in the mirror. He did not write in a gratitude journal. He did one thing. For approximately 5 minutes before he fell asleep, he held a single, specific, emotionally real picture of himself behaving as someone who was financially grounded. Not rich in a fantasy sense. Grounded, unhurried, making a decision about money from a position of clarity rather than panic. He made the picture specific. He used details from his actual life, his actual apartment, his actual job, his actual face. The brain finds borrowed scenes less convincing than inhabited ones. He let himself feel what that version of himself felt. Not the relief of having escaped a problem, but the ordinary steadiness of someone who simply did not have that problem in the same way. 8 months. That was not a transformative moment. It was a series of ordinary nights that accumulated into a different behavioral baseline. People who knew Donovan said he seemed less reactive about money. He noticed it differently. He began declining things that had previously felt obligatory, small spending decisions that had been driven by discomfort rather than desire. He began proposing a raise at work in language that was direct without being apologetic. He could not have told you why in any precise way. He had not taken a course. He had not changed his income dramatically, not yet. He had changed the installed identity. And the installed identity changes the behavior, and changed behavior produces different outcomes. That is the sequence, not the other way around. Here is where most people get the sequence backwards. They wait for their financial situation to improve and then plan to feel like a financially grounded person. But the feeling is not the reward. The feeling, rehearsed and installed during the hypnagogic window, is the cause. You do not wait to arrive and then feel it. You feel it first at the edge of sleep where the gatekeeper cannot argue with you. The feeling installs. Behavior follows. And then the external situation begins to respond to behavior that was never possible before. The gatekeeper cannot argue during the window. Remember that. The rational defensive filter that blocks identity-level change during the day, the part of your mind that hears a wealth-related statement and immediately lists 17 reasons it does not apply to you, that filter shuts down on schedule every night. You do not have to defeat it. You do not have to argue past it. You simply have to wait for it to close and then bring the right material to what remains. What remains is open. What remains is listening. Go back to the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not emotionally, literally. What were you lying there thinking about on a typical night? What picture of yourself and your life were you running through before you went dark? Most people, when they trace this back honestly, can see a consistency they did not notice in real time. A consistency in the theme. A consistency in the emotional quality. A consistency in what they were, night after night, quietly installing. That consistency is not your fault. You were not taught the window was a tool. But once you know, the same consistency becomes available to you deliberately. The same reliable repetition that installed the old picture can install the new one. This is not magic. It is the most basic feature of how human brains consolidate experience into identity. In a later section, you will run into an idea about repetition, and change that breaks with the story most people inherited. After that really registers, it starts changing how you use every single night going forward. But here is what matters now. The window is neutral. The window is always open. And the window is going to install something tonight whether you choose or not. Claudia at her kitchen table. Donovan in the 5 minutes before sleep. The same mechanism. Different material. Decades of different outcomes. Now close the open question this chapter held. What has been installed in you over 5 years of falling asleep the same way? You already know the answer. It lives in the gap between who you tell yourself you are and how you actually behave when money is in the room. What you bring to the window tonight is the first deliberate answer to that question. And tomorrow night you bring it again. Chapter 6. The Wealth Identity Script that the Gate Accepts. Every night you sleep, something is being written into you. Not by you, without your permission. The beliefs you absorbed before age 12, the money conversations you overheard, the unspoken rules your household carried about who gets ahead and who does not, these are being reinforced, cycle by cycle, as your brain consolidates the day. You are not neutral during sleep. You are being authored. The version of you that wakes up tomorrow is shaped by a script you never chose and may have never examined. That is not a metaphor. That is neuroscience. The question is not whether your subconscious is being written. The question is who is doing the writing. Right now, the answer is the past. But there is a 5-minute window each night where that changes. Where the gate swings open and the author of your identity can be you. What you bring through that gate determines whether it is accepted or silently refused. Most people, even people who try, bring the wrong thing. What you bring tonight matters more than what you did all day. Here is the open question this chapter plants, and the promise it will answer before these words are done. Why do some people use sleep intentionally and still wake up feeling exactly the same? You already know the window exists. You have felt the hypnagogic state, that warm, dissolving moment when your body goes slack and the border between your thoughts and something deeper begins to thin. Chapter 1. Introduce the gatekeeper. That vigilant, rational filter the conscious mind runs constantly, scanning every incoming idea for threat, for implausibility, for conflict with what it already believes to be true. During your waking hours, that gatekeeper is sharp. It has to be. It is doing its job. When you try to tell yourself that money flows easily to you while sitting at a desk staring at an overdrawn account, the gatekeeper reads the context, compares the claim to the evidence, and rejects it. Quietly. Efficiently. Without drama. The affirmation slides off, not because you lack willpower, because the gate was closed, but the gate does not stay closed forever. At the edge of sleep, the conscious filter powers down. Brainwave activity moves from the fast, critical beta state into the slower, more receptive theta range. In that state, the brain is not comparing your incoming message to existing evidence. It is simply receiving. This is the window. What you may not know is that the window has preferences. The subconscious during the hypnagogic state does not accept any message equally. It accepts what it can simulate. Read that again slowly in your mind. The subconscious accepts what it can simulate. It is not looking for instructions. It is not looking for goals or affirmations or declarations of intent. It is looking for experience, for sensory texture, for something it can run internally like a film it has already seen, a room it recognizes, a feeling it can locate somewhere in the body. When you give it that, it takes it in. When you give it an abstract claim, I am financially free, I attract wealth, it has nowhere to put it. There is no simulation to run. The words exist, but the experience does not. And the subconscious, even in its open state, cannot hold what it cannot render. The message dissolves before it reaches anything useful. This is why people try and feel nothing change. Remember the life you were living back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Whatever you believed about money then, about what you deserved, about how far someone like you could actually go, that belief was not argued into you by logic. It was absorbed through repetition, through emotional atmosphere, through small moments that carried weight. The beliefs that lived deepest in you were never instructions. They were experiences that got repeated until the subconscious treated them as fact. You are not going to undo that with a declaration. You are going to undo it by giving the subconscious a competing experience repeatedly in the exact state where it is still open enough to accept one. What that experience sounds like matters enormously. There is a specific format, 4 elements, and every element has a reason. The first element is present tense, grounded in a single ordinary moment. Not a vision of an empire, not a scene of celebration, not a dramatic arrival, a single quiet Tuesday, a regular morning, you doing something specific and small in a life where money is handled with ease. The reason this works is that the subconscious does not respond well to cinematic fantasy. It recognizes spectacle as unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity creates friction even when the gate is open. But a quiet, ordinary moment, that it can hold, that it can simulate without resistance. The scene should be so undramatic that it barely feels worth describing. That is exactly right. Consider Marcus. Marcus was 31, worked in logistics, and had spent 2 years trying every morning routine anyone recommended. Journaling, visualization boards, affirmations recorded on his phone. Nothing moved. The number in his account did not change meaningfully. And more frustrating, the way he felt about money did not change at all. He still woke with that low hum of financial dread he had known since childhood. One evening, instead of his usual 10-minute guided meditation, he lay in the dark and simply described a morning. In his description, he was sitting at his kitchen table, coffee going, paying a bill without checking the balance first, not because he was rich, just because he knew it was covered. He described the weight of the mug, the light through the window, the specific unhurried feeling in his shoulders. He described it in the present tense as if it were happening. He was asleep before he finished. He did not wake up wealthy, but something had shifted in the quality of the silence around money. The second element is sensory specificity, not "I feel calm about money." That is a report. You want the texture underneath the report, the weight of the mug, the particular quiet of a morning before the city wakes, the smoothness of the table under your palm, the breath that is slightly slower than usual. Sensory detail is the currency of the subconscious. It is the syntax this part of your mind reads fluently. When your script contains real sensory texture, the subconscious does not need to decide whether to believe it. It simply runs it. What gets run gets reinforced. What gets reinforced becomes identity. The third element is identity anchoring. This is where most attempts collapse without anyone realizing why. The scene you describe must contain you behaving in a way that a certain kind of person behaves. Not a person achieving, a person being. There is a critical difference. Achieving implies arrival from somewhere else. Being implies origin. The subconscious installs origin stories, not achievement stories. So the scene is not you getting the money. The scene is you being the person for whom money is a natural part of an ordinary day. The person who checks email without bracing for bad news. The person who speaks about finances without dropping their voice. The person who thinks about the next year without a knot forming in the chest. These behavioral signatures, placed inside a sensory scene, give the subconscious a character to become, not an outcome to chase. Identity by installation, not aspiration. That is the principle beneath the principle. The fourth element is emotional neutrality. This one surprises people. Not joy, not excitement, not relief. Neutrality. The reason is precision. The hypnagogic state is borderline, and strong emotion, even positive strong emotion, can jolt the brain back toward consciousness. More importantly, the emotion you want the subconscious to associate with wealth is not celebration. Celebration signals a rare event. Neutrality signals a norm. When your scene carries the quiet emotional temperature of an ordinary Tuesday, you are telling the subconscious this is simply how life is. Not a peak, not an exception, normal. And once the subconscious accepts something as normal, it begins organizing your perception and your behavior to match that normal, quietly, without your conscious participation, exactly as it has always done, only now with a script you chose. Before long, You will run into an idea about motivation that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once that becomes real to you, it starts changing how you act every single morning before you even touch your phone. Now here is the answer to the question planted at the start of this chapter. Why do some people use sleep intentionally and still feel nothing change? Because they bring the gate the wrong format. They bring declarations the subconscious cannot simulate. They bring scenes so dramatic or unfamiliar that the brain treats them as fiction. They bring strong emotion that pulls them back to alertness. Or they bring nothing sensory at all, just words, just labels, just names for experiences rather than the experiences themselves. The gate opens, but what they send through does not fit the opening. The format is not complicated. Present tense, ordinary moment, sensory texture, identity behavior, emotional neutrality. 5 elements that together create something the subconscious can hold, run, reinforce, and eventually install as the new baseline understanding of who you are. Your script does not need to be long. A single well-constructed scene of 2 or 3 minutes is enough. Less is more precise. More precise is more effective. You are not trying to overwhelm the subconscious with volume. You are trying to give it one clean signal, repeated enough nights in a row that it becomes the signal the brain defaults to. The gate accepts what fits through the gate. And now the question that the next chapter will answer. Once the script is built, how many repetitions does it actually take before the installation is real? And what does the research say happens in the brain on the night something finally changes? Chapter 7. The exact physical protocol that opens the gate. The body opens the gate. The mind only walks through it. That sounds backwards. If you have spent any time reading about reprogramming your beliefs or changing your identity, it probably sounds like a step down, like someone just told you the secret to flying is to look at your feet. But stay with this. Everything you have tried to change about how you relate to money, everything that has not stuck, has almost certainly failed at exactly this junction. Not because your thinking was wrong. Because you were trying to use the mind to bypass the mind. That does not work. What works is going underneath it entirely. And the way underneath is through a door that only the body knows how to open. This chapter is about the exact physical sequence that gets you there, reliably, night after night. Not theory, not metaphor. The actual steps in order and the reason each one matters. Before we get to the steps, there is a question that has been sitting open since the very beginning of this book. Back in Chapter 1, we talked about the gatekeeper, that internal filter whose entire job is to reject information that does not match what you already believe about yourself and money. We said it was the obstacle. We said it stood between you and any real change. And we left that tension there, unresolved, because there was something about the gatekeeper that had not been fully said yet. Something that, once you hear it, changes the entire picture. You will get that in Chapter 13. But tonight, what you need to know is this: the gatekeeper has a schedule. When you learn to read that schedule through your own body, the gate does not just open by accident. You open it on purpose. Now, slow down for a moment, not metaphorically, literally. Take a breath that is slightly longer than the last one. This chapter is going to ask something different of you than the others have. It is going to ask you to do something physical while you listen, or at least to rehearse it clearly enough in your mind that your body begins to recognize the sequence. The protocol only works if you have run it enough times that it becomes automatic. So let the pace of these words be the beginning of the practice. Here is where most people are when they try this for the first time. They lie down, they close their eyes, and they wait for something to happen. Maybe they repeat an affirmation. Maybe they try to visualize. And within 4 minutes, one of two things occurs. They fall asleep before anything registers, or their mind starts reviewing the day, building arguments, drifting toward worry. The 5-minute window comes and goes. The subconscious never received a signal that meant anything. The problem is not willpower. The problem is sequence. There is an exact order in which the body must be prepared before the hypnagogic state becomes accessible on demand. Skip a step, and you are gambling with the window. Follow the sequence, and you are standing at the gate with a key in your hand. Travel back 3 years and look clearly, not professionally, not financially, but physically at night. Think about how you went to sleep. Did you just collapse into it? Did you scroll until your eyes gave out? Did you lie there and hope your brain would eventually quiet down? Most of us were never taught that the transition into sleep is a moment you can actually shape. We treated it like a power outage, something that happens to you, not something you participate in. That assumption has cost you more than you know. Step 1 is position. Lie on your back. This is not optional for the protocol, not at first. On your back, the body sends a signal to the nervous system that is distinct from all other positions. It is a posture of stillness, not of comfort-seeking or turning away. Your arms rest alongside your body or lightly on your abdomen. Legs uncrossed, feet falling slightly outward. The spine is long, not rigid, but long. You are not performing a yoga pose. You are simply removing all the postural negotiations the body usually makes when it is trying to find comfort on its side. Those small adjustments, the shifting, the tucking, they cost attention. And attention is exactly what you need to redirect. The room itself matters, not dramatically but precisely, cooler than you think you need. Around 67 to 68 degrees if you can manage it. Darkness that is actual darkness, not just dim. The reason is physiological. The drop in body temperature and the absence of light both accelerate the onset of the hypnagogic state by signaling unambiguously to the brain that deep night has arrived. You are not setting a mood. You are sending a neurological instruction. Step 2 is the breath. Most written protocols go vague here, so pay attention to the specificity. Breathe in through the nose for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 7. Exhale through slightly parted lips for a count of 8. That is the classic 4-7-8 pattern. The reason it works for this particular purpose is the exhale. 8 counts of exhale activates the vagus nerve, which drops the heart rate, which lowers cortisol, which begins the process of loosening the prefrontal cortex's grip on your awareness. The gatekeeper lives in that grip. The long exhale is the first loosening. You do this 4 times. Not 2, not 6. 4 complete cycles. After the 4th exhale, you stop counting. You let the breath return to its natural rhythm. This transition from counted to uncounted breath is itself a signal. It tells the body that the controlled phase is over and the drift phase has begun. Step 3 is the eyes. This is the step most people have never heard of. It is likely the most physically direct route to the hypnagogic threshold. With your eyes closed, allow them to drift slowly upward, not strained, not rolled back. Just a gentle, lazy upward angle, as if you were looking toward the top of your own forehead from the inside. Hold them there lightly. You are not maintaining this with effort. You are simply allowing the natural resting position of the eyes to settle slightly above the center line. This position is associated with alpha and theta brainwave activity. There is a reason people's eyes move upward when they are accessing memory, or when they are in deep thought, or when they are about to cry. The upward gaze corresponds to internal states. You are using the body to ask the brain for a specific state, the way a musician might use a particular chord to call a particular emotion. Stay here. breathing naturally, eyes softly upward. Within 60 to 90 seconds, you will begin to notice something. The visual field behind your closed eyelids will start to do something strange. Shapes, fragments of imagery, light that has no source. A face that is not anyone you know, vivid for a half second, then gone. Colors that pulse and dissolve. This is hypnagogia. This is the threshold. And here is the critical instruction: do not react to it. The moment you find it interesting, the moment you say to yourself, "Oh, it's working," you step back from the edge. The conscious commentary is the gatekeeper reasserting itself. What you do instead is simple and difficult in equal measure. You observe it the way you would observe clouds from a moving car, present, unhurried, not reaching. You are watching, and the watching is soft. This is where the protocol hands the work to your prepared script. The identity statements you have built, the declarations that describe who you already are in relation to money and value and security, those go in now, spoken internally, in the first person, present tense, calmly, not with urgency. Urgency is a waking state emotion. Down here, you are not convincing yourself. You are informing a mind that is no longer defending against anything. Her name was 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘. She was 29, working in logistics coordination, making a salary she had long since stopped thinking of as temporary. For 11 months she had tried journaling, vision boards, a course she bought and half finished. Nothing wrong with any of it. None of it touched the thing underneath. She started the physical protocol on a Wednesday. The first 3 nights she fell asleep somewhere in the I position step. The 4th night she held the threshold for what felt like 2 minutes, which was probably 40 seconds. On the 7th night she stayed there long enough to deliver her statement, the one she had written about being someone to whom financial decisions came easily, someone whose first instinct about money was calm and clear rather than tight and braced. She does not remember finishing the statement. She fell into sleep mid-sentence. But in the morning she sat at her kitchen table and made a call she had been delaying for 4 months to a financial advisor, someone who could help her sort out the thing she had been pretending was too complicated to face. She did not plan to make that call. She just made it. The installation does not announce itself. That is the detail worth sitting with. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 did not wake up feeling different. She did not have a revelation. The new instruction had simply been received, and her behavior followed, the way a plant grows toward light without deciding to. What this tells you is that you cannot use the results to verify the process in real time. The protocol does not come with a receipt. What it comes with is this: a body that is positioned correctly, a nervous system that has been walked down through the breath, eyes that have found the upward angle, a visual field alive with the first flickers of threshold imagery, and a statement delivered into that stillness quietly, without need or doubt. The gate opens on physical cue, not on belief, not on effort, not on how motivated you felt when you lay down. The body is the key, and you have just been handed the precise shape of it. Down the line in this book, you will run into an idea about repetition, specifically, how many nights it actually takes before an installed identity begins to change visible behavior, and what is actually happening in the brain on the night the change becomes permanent that breaks with the story most people inherited. That is the question the previous chapter left you with. The answer is coming, and it is not what you expect. But before repetition can do anything, the gate has to be open. Now you know exactly how to open it. The body is the lock. The protocol is the key. Everything else follows. Chapter 8. Consistency turns a window into a doorway. Tonight, while you sleep, something is being decided without your input. Not by circumstance, Not by luck, by repetition. The thoughts that visit you most often at the edge of sleep are not harmless. They are instructions. And right now, if those instructions have not been chosen deliberately, they are defaulting to whatever pattern has occupied that threshold the longest. For most people, that means the oldest, most limiting version of who they believe themselves to be. That version is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply runs quietly night after night, deepening its own groove while you assume nothing is happening because your eyes are closed. Here is what that costs. Every night that groove goes uninterrupted is another night the subconscious receives confirmation that the current identity is correct. Not temporary. Correct. The subconscious does not question confirmation. It builds on it. So the gap between where you are and where you want to be is not just a function of your actions. It is a function of what is being reinforced while you sleep. That mechanism is already running. The only question is whether you are directing it. This chapter is about direction. Specifically, what happens when direction becomes consistent. The body is the lock. The protocol is the key. Everything else follows. But here is the part most people miss entirely. A key used once opens a door. A key used nightly rebuilds the architecture of the room behind it. Think about the question that may have been forming since the early chapters of this book. Not the one about how to enter the hypnagogic state, you have that now. The deeper one. The one that sounds like, even if this works, how do I make it stick? How does a single 5-minute window at the edge of sleep become something that permanently alters how I think about money, about my own capacity, about what I am allowed to expect from life? That is the question this chapter answers. Hold it close. There is a man named Darius who worked in logistics for 11 years. Not a glamorous job. A useful one. He managed shipping routes, tracked inventory, kept things moving. He was competent, steady, and chronically underpaid relative to his output. He had accepted that fact not because he agreed with it, but because the acceptance itself had become a kind of identity. He was the person who made things work for others. He had never seriously imagined being the person others worked for. He started using the hypnagogic window on a Tuesday in November. The first night he fell asleep too fast. The second night he stayed in the window for maybe 90 seconds before losing the thread. The third night he held it for nearly 4 minutes and introduced a single image. Himself reviewing a contract, his name at the top, his terms on the page. Nothing elaborate. One image, held without force, released without attachment. He kept going. Not because he felt changed. He did not feel changed. He kept going because the protocol was specific. The time cost was 5 minutes, and he had promised himself he would give it 3 weeks before deciding anything. By the end of 3 weeks, Darius had not quit his job. He had not won anything. But a former colleague had contacted him about a consulting arrangement. When the offer came, he did not hesitate. He did not shrink. He named a number he had never named before, and the number was accepted without negotiation. He told me later that the strangest part was not the outcome. The strangest part was that the hesitation he expected, the familiar internal voice that said, "Who do you think you are?" simply did not arrive. The groove had changed. Now let one beat pass before drawing this forward. What happened to Darius was not magic. Calling it magic would insult the mechanism. What happened was installation. Your brain does not differentiate between a memory and a rehearsed experience with sufficient emotional texture. This is not a metaphor. It is neuroscience with decades of imaging studies behind it. The neural pathway activated by a vividly imagined event is structurally indistinguishable from the pathway activated by an event that actually occurred. What the hypnagogic window does, What makes it functionally different from daytime visualization is remove the interference layer. The conscious mind steps down from its post right at the threshold of sleep, and in that window, the instruction arrives without the argument. But one arrival is not installation. One delivery is not a renovation. This is where consistency stops being motivational advice and starts being architectural fact. Look back at the person you were back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not in terms of external achievement, in terms of who you believed you were, what you thought you were capable of, what kind of financial life you thought was available to someone like you. How many of those beliefs have actually changed since then? And how many have simply been temporarily overridden by enthusiasm that eventually faded? That fade is not weakness. It is what happens when new information reaches a subconscious that has not been updated. The old identity reasserts. It always does. Until it has been repeated into obsolescence. This is why the 21-day arc exists. It is not an arbitrary number pulled from habit mythology. It is a practical window, long enough to produce measurable neural reinforcement, short enough to feel genuinely achievable. 3 weeks, not forever. 3 weeks of nightly 5-minute sessions, each one a deliberate deposit into a specific internal account. The arc has 3 distinct phases. Knowing what each phase actually feels like will keep you from quitting during the one that tests you most. Days 1 through 7 are the calibration phase. You are learning the landscape of your own threshold. Some nights the window opens wide. Some nights you blow past it before you register the shift. You will fall asleep mid-session more than once. That is not failure. The content still lands, often more deeply, because the delivery goes straight through with no resistance. During this phase, your one job is simple: show up, enter the protocol, introduce the content, release control. The content itself should be narrow, not a full cinematic vision of your ideal life. One scene, one feeling. One version of you that already holds the financial identity you are installing. Let that version simply exist in the space between waking and sleep. Do not push. Do not evaluate. Evaluation belongs to the conscious mind, and the conscious mind is standing down. Your metric for days 1 through 7 is not transformation. It is attendance. Days 8 through 14 are the reinforcement phase. This is the one that catches people off guard. Around day 9 or 10, something slightly uncomfortable happens. Old patterns surface with more energy than usual. You might notice a flash of skepticism that feels sharper than before. You might catch yourself thinking about money in the old contracted way and feel frustrated because you thought you were past that. You are not regressing. You are experiencing what happens when a new signal gets loud enough that the existing pattern has to respond to it. A groove being carved encounters resistance. That resistance is not proof the process is failing. It is proof the process is working. During days 8 through 14, hold the content steady. Do not change the scene. Do not add drama or urgency. The image or feeling you introduced in week 1, return to it exactly. Consistency of content during this phase is what converts repetition into depth. You are not adding new instructions. You are pressing the same key into soft wax again and again until the impression becomes permanent. Days 15 through 21 are the integration phase. This is the quietest stretch, and its quiet is the most important signal. By day 15, most people report that something has shifted in the interval between sessions, not during the sessions between them. A decision made during the day that does not carry the old hesitation. A conversation about money that proceeds with unexpected directness. A number named like Darius named his, without the arrival of the voice that used to follow such moments. The subconscious default has begun to update, not completely, not in every domain, but enough that the new identity is no longer only a night instruction. It has begun to operate as a daytime assumption. This is identity by installation, not aspiration. The distinction is everything. Aspiration is wanting to become someone. Installation is training the subconscious until it simply assumes you already are. The open gate is not open all the time. It opens on schedule in that narrow hypnagogic window, and then the gatekeeper returns. But what passes through the gate during those 5 minutes does not evaporate when the gate closes. It goes into the architecture. And architecture, unlike intention, does not require your ongoing belief to function. Your house does not need you to believe in the walls to stay standing. The walls stand because of what was built into them, night after night, one deliberate layer at a time. A little later, we will get to a point about resistance, specifically the kind that seems to intensify right when you are closest to real change that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that idea snaps into focus, it starts changing exactly how you respond when the process feels hardest. For now, one thing is worth carrying out of this chapter above everything else. A window used once is an experience. A window used nightly is a renovation. The question is not whether the hypnagogic window works. You have seen the mechanism. You understand why the threshold matters. The only practical question left is whether you will return to the window tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that, until the version of you that earns differently, spends differently, and expects differently is no longer something you are reaching for. It is simply who you have become. Chapter 9. Morning Evidence that the install is working. The first sign the work is working is not what you think it is. You are probably expecting to feel different, calmer, more confident, wealthier in some internal way you can sense before the bank account reflects it. That sounds reasonable. It is also almost never how it happens. The earliest signs of subconscious reprogramming do not arrive as feelings. They arrive as behaviors. Small ones so quiet you could easily dismiss them as coincidence or mood. If you dismiss them, you miss the only reliable evidence trail that the install is actually taking hold. This chapter is about learning to read that trail before it becomes obvious. The window between first evidence and first result is the most fragile stretch of any real change. Miss the signals and you might quit 3 days before the compound effect breaks into the open. Here is the question worth sitting with. How do you know when something is changing inside you? Most people reach for feelings first. They want the sensation of transformation. But here is what no one tells you. By the time you feel different, you have already been different for a while. The behavior changed first. The feeling is just the brain catching up, building a story around choices you have already started making differently. That gap is exactly where Tobias lived for the first 11 days. Tobias was 31 years old. He worked in logistics coordination, managed a team of 6, paid his bills mostly on time, and had carried the same $4,000 balance on a credit card for 2.5 years. Not because he couldn't eliminate it, because some part of him had decided it was simply part of his financial furniture. Permanent, normal, his. He had read about wealth mindset. He had tried affirmations. He had even paid for one online course that told him to write his desired net worth on a sticky note and put it on his bathroom mirror. He did that for a week before it started to feel embarrassing. Nothing shifted. Then Tobias started using the hypnagogic window, not dramatically, not with grand ceremony. He started doing the specific installation work in the 5 minutes before sleep claimed him, feeding the subconscious the identity of someone who made clear financial decisions, who recognized opportunity, who spent with intention and moved toward wealth without apology. He did it quietly, night after night. 11 days passed. Nothing felt different. He almost stopped. Day 12, something small happened, and small is the right word. His coworker Marcus mentioned at lunch that their manager had let slip there might be an opening on the regional operations side. A lateral move in title, but a significant income jump. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘's old response to a piece of information like that was well practiced. A slight internal recoil, a quick mental list of reasons it wouldn't pan out, and then a smooth change of subject so no one could accuse him of caring about something he might not get. Deflection as self-protection. He knew the move. He had made it hundreds of times. On day 12, he did not make it. He asked Marcus 2 specific questions. What department? When was the timeline? Not dramatically. Not with a speech about going for his dreams. Just 2 ordinary questions asked by a man who considered the information worth pursuing. The whole exchange lasted 40 seconds. 𝗡𝗢𝗧 drove home that evening without even registering it as significant. But it was significant. That is the thing about behavioral evidence. It rarely announces itself. It just quietly stops matching the old script. 𝗡𝗢𝗧 had not decided to be different in that conversation. He had not coached himself through it. The gate had simply been open long enough nights in a row that the pattern underneath the behavior had been rewritten. Not completely. Not permanently, not yet, but measurably. Think about your own life right now. Think about the last time you were in a conversation about money or opportunity and felt that same recoil, the fast, smooth pivot away from engagement. The change of subject, the dismissal. The version of yourself that decided, before full information arrived, that this particular path was not for you. Not because the path was wrong, because engaging with it felt dangerous in a way you had never examined. That reflex has a history. It was installed in you long before you had any say in the matter. It runs automatically without permission whenever the conditions that first created it are approximately matched. This is not a character flaw. It is just a program running, and programs can be replaced. The identity shows up in behavior before it shows up in belief. Say that again inside your mind, slowly. The identity shows up in behavior before it shows up in belief. This is the core mechanism of everything you have been building in these nightly sessions. You do not wait to believe you are a person who handles money with clarity. You notice that you handled money with clarity, and then, gradually, belief catches up to the evidence your own behavior is creating. 𝗡𝗢𝗧 noticed a second signal 3 days later. He was at a grocery store and he put something back on the shelf. Not because he could not afford it, he could, but because it was an impulsive grab, a comfort purchase triggered by a rough afternoon meeting, and some quieter part of him clocked it as not what he actually wanted. He stood in the aisle for about 4 seconds. Then he put it down and kept walking. He did not moralize about it. He did not congratulate himself. He just moved on. He mentioned it to nobody. It felt like nothing. It was not nothing. That 4-second pause was a gap that had not existed in him before. A tiny space between impulse and action where something new was operating, a version of 𝗡𝗢𝗧 that had a different relationship to money, to emotion, to what spending was supposed to do for him. He had not decided to create that gap. The gap appeared because the underlying identity had shifted enough to generate it. Behavior before belief, evidence before feeling. Here is where the open loop from earlier in this chapter closes. You asked how you know when something is changing inside you. Now you have the answer. You do not monitor your feelings. Feelings are late-stage evidence. You watch your behavior in the ordinary moments, the lunch conversation you engage with instead of deflecting, the aisle decision that reflects intention instead of impulse, the question you ask instead of the subject you change. These are the fingerprints of a new identity, still too fresh to announce itself confidently, but already present enough to act. The reason most people miss this evidence is that they are watching for the wrong thing. They want the dramatic signal, the sudden surge of confidence, the morning they wake up feeling like a fundamentally different person, the moment the number in their account visibly breaks a threshold. They are scanning for proof at the level of result. But result is the last thing to change. Before result comes behavior. Before behavior comes the subconscious pattern driving it. And the subconscious pattern started changing the first night you used the window correctly. This does not mean you sit back and wait. The evidence watching is an active practice. It requires attention. Every day starting now, give yourself one honest question to answer. Where did I respond to money or opportunity differently than I would have 6 months ago? Not better, not worse, just differently. You are looking for divergence from the old pattern, any divergence, a pause where there was no pause before, a question where there was only silence. A slight movement towards something instead of away from it. Write it down if it helps. Say it aloud if no one is around. But register it. Because the act of registering behavioral evidence accelerates the consolidation of the new identity. You are telling your brain, this is real, this happened. This is who I am becoming. The brain, which has been encoding your identity through observation of your own behavior since you were a child, takes that registration seriously. 𝗓𝗡𝗧 applied for the regional operations role. He did not get it the first time. He found this out on a Thursday afternoon, read the email, felt the familiar sting, and then noticed something strange. He was already thinking about what the next move was, not spiraling. Not confirming some old story about not being the kind of person who got the better opportunities. Just, practically, what was next. That is not how he had responded to professional disappointment before. He knew it. He registered it, and in that moment of registration, something solidified. Not the belief that he would always respond this way. Not a permanent announcement of a new self. Just a small recognition. There is something different operating in here now. And it came from the work done in the dark in 5 minutes, night after night, before sleep closed the gate. Further on, we will get to a point about motivation and willpower that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once that lands, it immediately changes how you act every morning from that point forward. But for now, this is enough. The evidence is already there. You are probably already generating signals you have not been trained to read until this chapter. The slightly different choice. The moment you stayed in the conversation. The pause you do not remember taking. The new identity does not arrive with a ceremony. It simply starts showing up for work. Chapter 10. The hypnagogic window can be extended. Every night you spend without using that window is not a neutral night. It is not simply rest passing. Something is happening in there whether you direct it or not. Your brain is cycling through the hypnagogic state right on schedule. It drops the gate. It goes quiet in exactly the way that makes deep installation possible. And if nothing intentional has been placed at that threshold, something else fills it. The residue of the day. The anxiety you carried. The comparison you felt when you scrolled before bed. That content moves in uncontested and settles. Not once, every single night, compounding quietly over weeks and months into the very identity patterns you are trying to change. The mechanism works whether you use it deliberately or not. That is the part nobody tells you. The window opens regardless. The only question is what you are putting through it. And that question, once you sit with it, has a weight that does not leave easily. Now here is something that will become important. You already know the window exists. Earlier chapters showed you how to find it, how to recognize the drift, how to place a single clear intention at the moment the gate begins to close. That is the foundation. But what if 5 minutes is not enough? What if the identity you are trying to wire in at the neural level is complex enough that a narrow doorway is not sufficient? What if you could hold that door open longer, not crack it for a moment, but stand in it, working deliberately, extending the state itself so that more goes through before the gate closes? That is the question this chapter answers. And before you assume this requires years of meditation training or some exotic technique, understand this. The hypnagogic state is not a rare achievement. It is a biological event your nervous system is already running every single night. These protocols do not create something new. They teach you to stay inside something that is already happening. Return to the person you were back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Specifically, what you believed about money at the level below words. Not what you said you believed. What you felt when an unexpected bill arrived. What you assumed would happen every time you got close to a financial goal. What you privately expected from yourself when the numbers were tight. That layer of belief was not installed through logic. Nobody sat you down and made an argument for why you should feel that way. It was installed through repetition, through emotional charge, through thousands of quiet moments when a certain story about you and money played without resistance. The hypnagogic window is the one time each day when that same depth of the mind is reachable, when the critical filter goes offline and the channel opens. 3 years from now, what do you want that layer to contain? Here is where the neuroscience becomes immediately useful. The hypnagogic state sits at a specific frequency band. Your brain during that transition is producing theta waves, roughly 4 to 8 cycles per second. This is the same range that shows up in experienced meditators, in children during open learning states, and in adults during moments of creative flow just before a breakthrough arrives. Theta is not mystical. It is a measurable electromagnetic signature of reduced cognitive filtering. The default mode network, which houses self-referential thought and habitual identity narratives, quiets down. The critical editor that spends your waking hours rejecting anything that contradicts your current self-image does not vanish, but it steps back. What arrives in theta has a shorter route to the structures that hold identity-level memory. The problem is that most people fall through this state rather than inhabiting it. You are awake, then you are not, and the window closes behind you without you ever consciously entering it. There is a reason for this. Your nervous system has been trained over years to treat the onset of drowsiness as the start of sleep, so it accelerates through the transition. The body relaxes, the thoughts begin to fragment, and the pull toward unconsciousness is immediate and strong. Nobody taught you to pause there, so you never did. 3 protocols change this. Each one works through a different mechanism, and knowing why each one works is exactly what makes you trust it enough to use it consistently. The first is body point anchoring. Not visualization, not breath counting, but a specific physical focus that keeps a thin thread of awareness active during the descent into theta. Here is how it works neurologically. When you concentrate a small amount of attention on a single physical point, the sensory cortex maintains a mild activation signal. That signal is low enough not to trigger waking-level alertness, but persistent enough to slow the collapse into full unconsciousness. A common point is the center of the palm. You do not grip or tense. You simply maintain a soft awareness of that single spot. The sensation will begin to change as theta deepens. Warmth, pressure, tingling, or a kind of gentle vibration are all normal. These are not imagined. They are the body reporting proprioceptive changes as the nervous system's threshold drops. As long as you can still feel that point, you are still inside the window. The moment you lose it, you have slipped through. With practice, the gap between noticing and losing it grows longer. This matters enormously. Every second you maintain consciousness inside the theta band is a second when your wealth identity content has an unobstructed route to the deeper storage the brain reserves for identity-level material, placed deliberately, placed specifically. The second protocol involves sound, specifically, a form of audio engineering called binaural entrainment. This is worth understanding precisely so you use it correctly. When your left ear receives a tone at one frequency and your right ear receives a tone at a slightly different frequency, the brain produces a third signal at the difference between the two. Feed 400 Hz to one ear and 406 to the other, and the brain generates a 6 Hz signal internally. 6 Hz is theta. The brain is not hearing this signal. The brain is producing it. The neurons are literally being paced toward the target state by the difference between the two input tones. This requires headphones to work. It cannot happen through speakers, because spatial separation of the two tones is the entire mechanism. Done correctly, binaural audio can guide a brain that would normally blow through the hypnagogic window into a sustained theta state lasting not 5 minutes but 20 or 30. And in that extended window, with body point anchoring keeping a thread of awareness active, you have something that resembles a controlled installation session rather than a momentary crack in the door. The extended window is not more of the same thing. It is categorically different. Consider what happens to a seed in the ground for 5 minutes versus 5 hours. The conditions are identical. The potential is identical. The outcome is not. Depth of installation follows duration of access, and the hypnagogic window can be held open long enough to make that difference real. There is a character worth introducing here. Her name is Renata. For most of her 20s, she worked nights at a distribution warehouse outside of Cleveland. She had a specific and stubborn belief about her own ceiling. Not about the world, not about fairness, but about herself personally. About the category of person she belonged to and what that category was allowed to earn. She had tried affirmations. She had tried journaling. She had read 3 books that told her to visualize a different life. Nothing moved the underlying feeling. She could say the words and feel the contrast between the words and what she actually believed. And that contrast was its own discouragement. What changed for Renata was not more information. It was timing. She began using a specific binaural track during her pre-sleep window, paired with body point anchoring. She placed one image, one clear and specific financial identity statement, at the threshold each night. Not a fantasy. A version of herself that was plausible but one level beyond her current position. 3 months later, she applied for a logistics coordinator role she would previously have dismissed without opening the posting. She got it. She did not get it because she had changed her thoughts. She got it because her automatic behavior at the moment of decision had changed. And it had changed because what the brain retrieves at the moment of a real decision is not a consciously rehearsed affirmation. It is the installed pattern that lives below thought. That pattern is now what you are building. The third protocol extends the window through what researchers studying sleep onset call intention anchoring in hypnagogic imagery. As the visual field shifts during theta, most people see fragmentary images, shapes, faces, brief scenes. These are not random. They are the brain's processing activity made visible. The protocol is this. When an image appears, do not follow it passively. Place your wealth identity statement into it. If you see a hallway, you are the person who walks through it as the version of yourself who already has what you are installing. Not imagining, inhabiting. The brain at this depth cannot easily distinguish between a strongly inhabited internal state and an external experience. The same neural architecture that encodes a real memory also encodes a vivid, emotionally present hypnagogic experience. Every image that arrives during an extended hypnagogic window is an opportunity, a piece of raw neural material the brain hands you and asks you to finish. You finish it as the version of yourself you are installing. That is the mechanism, not metaphor, not motivation. A neurological process you can run every night, extending it from a 5-minute crack to a 30-minute open channel, using entrainment audio to hold the frequency, body point anchoring to hold awareness, intention anchoring to fill the content. These are not separate techniques you choose between. They are layers of the same protocol, each one addressing a different part of the problem. The frequency, the consciousness, the content. One final point on this. The gatekeeper, that critical filter described early in this book as the obstacle standing between who you are now and who you need to become, follows a schedule. It begins to shut down on a timer once the body initiates the sleep cycle. That shutdown is not something you can argue with or override through willpower. It is physiological. But what you now know is that the shutdown itself is not the end of your access. It is the beginning of your best access. The question that has driven every chapter of this book is this. How do you get new identity material past a filter that never sleeps during waking hours? It turns out there is an answer the filter never anticipated. You do not get past it. You wait for it to step aside, then you walk through. Once you can find the window, you can widen it. A wider window means a deeper installation, a more complete version of the wealth identity you are building, transferred without resistance into the neural architecture that will determine what you do automatically the moment an opportunity appears. Soon, we will get to a point about consistency that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that becomes clear, it immediately changes how often and how easily you show up for this practice. What would you install if the window were open long enough to change everything that matters? Chapter 11. Day identity and night installation must match. Trying harder at night will not save you from what you contradict during the day. That sounds like a cruel caveat, like someone waiting to disqualify your effort after you have already begun. It is not. It is a structural observation about how the mind processes information across the full 24-hour cycle. Once you understand the mechanics, you will stop wondering why some people run the hypnagogic protocol for weeks and feel nothing change, while others notice a shift inside of 3 weeks that they cannot explain and can no longer deny. The question that opens this chapter is worth sitting with before it gets answered. If the window at night is genuinely open, genuinely unguarded, genuinely receptive to installation, then why does the installation sometimes fail to hold? That question is not rhetorical. It points to something real. What would you install if the window were open long enough to change everything that matters? The answer turns out to depend not only on what you install, but on whether the rest of your hours are helping that installation survive the morning. Here is the principle, stated plainly. The night installs what the day must not contradict. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 ran the protocol for 21 days. 43 years old, mid-level operations manager, the kind of man who read one book on investing and then let the book sit on the nightstand for 6 months without opening a brokerage account. Not from laziness, from a feeling he could not name, a feeling that money at that scale was not quite for him. He started the hypnagogic practice because a coworker mentioned it, the way people mention things that later turn out to reroute their lives. For 3 weeks he did everything right at night. He found the window. He held the images. He stayed in that slow, dissolving state and let the sensation of financial ease move through his chest the way the earlier chapters described. On day 21, something shifted. Not a windfall, not a sudden epiphany. Just a morning when he walked to the coffee maker and noticed, without deciding to notice, that he was not dreading the month ahead. The dread that had lived behind his sternum every first of the month, quiet but constant, was quieter. Not gone. Quieter. He stood at the counter trying to locate it and found it had moved. The way furniture moves when you are not home. The way you come back to a room and something is different but you cannot name what. What Tobias had done in those 21 days without quite planning it was something important. Picture the person you were back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not in terms of what you had or did not have, but in terms of how you carried yourself on a Tuesday morning when nothing special was happening. The way you spoke about money in passing conversation. The way you reacted when an unexpected bill arrived. The small decisions you made at the grocery store, at the gas station, in a conversation with someone who offered you an opportunity you could not quite believe was meant for you. That version of you had a posture. Not a physical one, an identity posture. And that posture was the daytime signal that either reinforced or canceled whatever the nighttime window was trying to install. This is the coherence principle, and it is more precise than it first sounds. When the hypnagogic window opens and you feed the subconscious a signal, that signal does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives into a system that has been running all day. The subconscious is not a passive recording device you access only at night. It is active, watching, cataloging evidence. Every time you spend the day behaving in ways that contradict the identity you are trying to install, you are sending a second signal, a louder one in many cases, because behavior is a form of declaration. What you do when no one is coaching you is what you actually believe about yourself. So the installation from the night meets the evidence from the day, and one of two things happens. Either the evidence supports the installation, and the new identity begins to calcify, to take up real estate in how you perceive yourself without conscious effort. Or the evidence contradicts the installation, and the subconscious does what it always does with contradiction. It defaults to the louder signal. The one with more behavioral proof. This is not a motivational point about consistency. This is a description of how the brain resolves competing inputs. Identity, at the neurological level, is the story with the most corroborating evidence. Change the evidence, and you change the story. Fail to change the evidence, and no amount of nighttime installation will override the daily proof you keep presenting. What does contradicting your installation actually look like? It looks ordinary. It looks like talking about how expensive everything is to anyone who will listen. Not because venting is wrong, but because that commentary reinforces a posture of scarcity right after you spent 5 minutes at the hypnagogic threshold rehearsing ease. It looks like refusing to open your bank app because you already know you will not like what you see, training yourself into financial avoidance while simultaneously trying to install financial confidence. It looks like deflecting a compliment about your competence, quietly signaling that you do not quite believe the better version of yourself you are trying to load into the system every night. None of these behaviors are dramatic. That is the point. They are so ordinary that they rarely get examined, and they compound. Consider a woman named Priya, 29, freelance graphic designer, earning just enough to feel stable but not enough to feel free. She started the nighttime practice after a conversation with a friend who had used it to get over her own psychological block about charging what her work was worth. Priya was diligent. She found the window, used it well, installed the image of herself naming a number in a client call without flinching. She could feel the version of herself who did that, who held the price without apology, without the small downward glance that usually preceded a discount. But during the day, every time a potential client asked about her rates, she apologized before she answered. Not in words necessarily, in tone. In the way her voice softened and her sentence started with, "Well, it depends," which is the verbal equivalent of a discount before negotiation. She was installing confidence at night and broadcasting apology during the day. The two signals were canceling each other like two sound waves moving in opposite directions. The fix was not to try harder at night. The fix was one small shift in the daytime behavior that matched what the installation was trying to establish. Not a total personality overhaul. One specific behavior made congruent with the identity she was loading. She practiced stating her rate out loud, alone in her apartment, the same way she had practiced it in the hypnagogic image. Just the words at full volume without apology attached. 30 seconds, every morning after coffee. 3 weeks later, the first time a client asked her rate during a real call, she said the number, straight, no softening syllable in front of it. The client said yes before she could brace for the no. Daytime behavior, done consistently in the direction of the identity you are installing, is not about pretending to be someone you are not. It is about presenting evidence to your own subconscious that the installation has a foundation. You are not faking it. You are building the corroboration the system requires before it accepts the new story as fact. Earlier in this book, you will encounter something that directly contradicts what most people believe about willpower and identity change. After that clicks, it immediately changes the specific daily decisions you make without you having to think about them. But right now, stay with the coherence principle, because it has a subtler dimension that most people miss. The opposite of contradiction is not perfection. You do not need a flawless day to support your nighttime installation. You need enough congruent signal that the installation has more evidence in its favor than against it. Think of it as a daily vote. Every small behavior casts a vote for who you are. The target is not unanimity. The target is a simple majority. A slight and consistent lean toward the identity you are building, so that by the time the gate opens at night and the installation goes in, it lands on soil that has been prepared, rather than soil packed down hard by hours of contradictory evidence. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘, on day 21, had done this without a formal plan. What he had done was small. He had stopped making the same self-deprecating joke about being bad with money. He made that joke often at work at dinner as a way of preempting embarrassment, a social habit so routine he had forgotten it was a habit. When he stopped making the joke, he did not stop because he was told to. He stopped because it started to feel wrong, like wearing a shirt that no longer fit. That wrongness was the installation working. The new identity was creating friction with old behaviors. When 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 honored the friction instead of dismissing it, the friction became progress. That is the signal to listen for. Not breakthrough, not certainty, friction. When a behavior that used to be effortless starts to feel slightly wrong, when a familiar self-deprecating thought generates a small resistance you did not choose to feel, when you reach for an old financial habit and your hand hesitates, that is the installation finding its edges in the waking world. That hesitation is not confusion. It is coherence in formation. The open loop introduced at the start of this chapter deserves its answer now. Why does the installation sometimes fail to hold? Because the day argues back. Because the subconscious receives two sets of evidence and resolves the contradiction in favor of the louder one. And the louder one is almost always behavior, not intention. The window opens, the signal goes in, and then 14 waking hours of behavioral contradiction walk it back. The night installs. The day decides whether the installation survives. So what does the day look like for someone building real coherence? It looks like one small deliberate behavior each morning that mirrors the installation. One decision made from the identity, not the old story. One moment held and let go. You do not need to perform wealth. You need to practice the specific behaviors that belong to the person you are installing, so that when the gate opens tonight, the ground beneath it is ready. What one behavior are you repeating every day that the person you are installing would no longer recognize as their own? Chapter 12. You have been reprogramming every night just badly. Every culture that has ever tried to understand the human mind has stumbled onto the same unsettling truth. Across centuries, in languages that share no common root, thinkers and healers and ordinary people who simply paid attention arrived at the same conclusion independently. The hours you spend unconscious are not empty hours. Something is happening in the dark. Something is being written. The question those people kept asking and the question you are sitting with right now is not whether the writing is happening. It is who is holding the pen. That question has never been more urgent than it is tonight. By the time this chapter ends, you will see that every night of your life has already been a reprogramming session. Every single one. The only thing that was missing was you. Now. That question the last chapter left you with, what behavior are you repeating that the person you are installing would no longer recognize? Hold that. Do not let it go. This chapter is going to answer it from an angle you did not expect. Here is the thing most people never confront. You did not arrive at your current financial beliefs by accident. You did not wake up one morning and consciously choose to believe that money is scarce, or that people like you do not build real wealth, or that every time things start to go well something will come along to level it back down. Those beliefs were placed, carefully, repeatedly, without your permission, and a significant portion of that placement happened while you were asleep. Revisit the person you were back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it, not just financially but in your mind. What were you telling yourself at night before you closed your eyes? What were you rehearsing? What failures were you re-examining in the dark? Most people, if they are honest, will admit that the content of their pre-sleep state was almost entirely made up of problems, replays, and low-grade dread. That is not a character flaw. That is a default setting installed by a world that never told you the window was open and never told you what it was for. So the loop was running every night. It just was not running content you chose. Here is the open loop this chapter wants you to carry for a few minutes before it closes. If the same mechanism that installs limiting beliefs can also install expansive ones, then why does it feel so different? Why does planting a belief that you are capable of real financial momentum feel like lying, while the old belief that you are stuck felt like plain truth? Sit with that. The answer is coming, and it will change how you use every night from here forward. There is a man named Daniel. He ran a small auto detailing business out of a van for 6 years. He was good at the work. His clients liked him, but every time he got close to having enough saved to open a proper shop, something would happen. An unexpected repair, a client who disappeared, a slow month that erased 3 good ones. He told himself the story that this was just how it went for someone like him, that real businesses were for other kinds of people. He did not say this out loud. He said it at night, quietly in the space between waking and sleep, when he reviewed the day and found all the evidence that confirmed what he already believed. 6 years of that. Every night, without realizing it, he was cementing the floor of a very small room and calling it a life. A friend eventually pointed out something simple. Not a strategy, not a new business plan. She asked him what he was thinking about in the last few minutes before he fell asleep each night. He laughed. He said he was usually thinking about what went wrong or what he was afraid would go wrong next. She said, "What if you used those minutes differently?" He was skeptical. He tried it anyway, not because he believed it would work, but because he had nothing to lose in the dark. 6 months later, he signed a lease on his first permanent location. The detail worth sitting with is not the lease. It is the 6 years. 6 years of consistent, nightly programming that reinforced the exact ceiling he kept bumping against. The mechanism was always working. The gate was always open. He was just sending through the wrong material, and he was doing it without knowing the gate existed at all. This is the relief this chapter wants to deliver to you directly. You have not been failing to reprogram yourself. You have been reprogramming yourself every night with tremendous efficiency. The subconscious does not take nights off. It does not get tired of installing. It does not require motivation or discipline to run. It runs. The only question is what you have been feeding it. And here is where the earlier question closes. Why does planting a new belief feel like lying while the old one felt like truth? Because the old one was installed first. It was installed repeatedly. It has years of nightly reinforcement behind it, which means it does not feel like a belief anymore. It feels like reality. It feels like the shape of the world. What feels like truth is almost always just what has been installed most often. That is not a cynical statement. It is actually the most hopeful thing in this entire book. Because it means the mechanism does not favor the old material. It does not protect it. It simply reflects whatever arrives through the open gate with enough repetition and enough emotional weight to register. You were never not being programmed. You were simply not the one deciding what got installed. That lands differently when you really let it in. It removes the mystery. It removes the mysticism. It turns the process of changing your financial identity from something vague and aspirational into something operational. You already have the equipment. You have been using it every night. All that changes now is the content. The behaviors that felt like they belonged to a different person, the checking of accounts with dread, the flinching when someone mentions money, the quiet belief that good things are for other people, those were not born in you. They were installed while the gate was open and you did not know it existed, which means they can be replaced the same way. Through the gate, at the same time, with the same mechanism, using the 5-minute window you already spend in the passage between waking and sleep each night. Identity is not aspiration. You cannot want your way to a new financial self. The wanting happens in the conscious mind, and the conscious mind is the part of you that has been arguing with that identity for years without moving it an inch. Real installation happens below that level. It happens in the hypnagogic window, where the gatekeeper steps aside and what you bring through lands without resistance. You already know what nightly bad programming looks like because you lived it. Now you know it had a name and a mechanism and a specific window, which means you also know that the reversal has the same name, the same mechanism, and the same window. The only variable that ever changed in Daniel's story was what he brought to that 5 minutes. The question that will open the next chapter is this: if the gatekeeper has been your obstacle for years, what happens the moment you learn to work with it instead of against it? Chapter 13. The gatekeeper that blocked you is now your ally. You have been fighting the wrong thing, not the wrong enemy exactly, but the wrong version of it. You stood at the mirror, or you sat quietly with your eyes closed, and you said the words. You said them with feeling. You said them again. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice came in behind those words and quietly, efficiently canceled each one. Not with cruelty, just with facts, just with evidence, just with everything it knew about you, everything it had cataloged over the years. The harder you pushed, the harder it pushed back. Here is what nobody told you about that experience. That resistance was not a flaw in you. It was not weak willpower. It was not a lack of belief. It was a mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do. And the same mechanism that blocked every affirmation you have ever spoken, every visualization you have ever attempted, every identity statement you have ever tried to install, that mechanism has a schedule. Every single night it shuts down. When you understand what that means, really understand it, the years of effort that felt wasted start to look like preparation. Call up the person you were back then, 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not just financially. Think about the story you were telling yourself about money, about your own capability, about whether people like you end up comfortable or just surviving. That story was not chosen consciously. It was installed. Someone or something delivered it to you at a time when your gatekeeper was either too young to exist or too tired to resist. It went in clean. No friction. No argument. No second voice saying, wait, is that actually true? That is the open loop this chapter is going to close. The question the last chapter left you with was this: if the gatekeeper has been your obstacle for years, what happens the moment you learn to work with it instead of against it? That question has an answer. And the answer is not complicated, but it requires you to see the gatekeeper differently than you ever have before. Marcus had been saying the same affirmation every morning for 11 months. He wrote it on an index card and taped it to his bathroom mirror. He said it while he brushed his teeth. He said it in the car. He said it before sales calls. The affirmation was specific and present tense, just like every book instructed. After 11 months, Marcus had not moved. His income was nearly identical. His anxiety about money was, if anything, slightly worse, because now he had the added belief that he was the kind of person who could not even make affirmations work. His friend Dana had started a similar practice around the same time. She was already reporting changes, not huge ones, but real ones. Small decisions made differently. Opportunities noticed that she would have previously dismissed. Dana was not smarter or more disciplined than Marcus. She was doing one thing differently. She had moved her practice to the last 5 minutes before sleep. She was not saying affirmations at the mirror under fluorescent lights with the day's to-do list pressing at the edges of her attention. She was saying them in the dark, in a whisper, on the slow, warm slide toward unconsciousness. The gatekeeper was already quieting. The door was already open, and the words she spoke did not get filtered. They went in the way those early beliefs had gone in, without resistance, without argument, without a second voice asking for evidence. Marcus changed nothing about his affirmation. He changed only when he said it. Sit with that for a moment. The content was never the problem. The hour was. Here is the principle this entire book has been moving toward. The conscious mind, that critical, evidence-gathering, identity-protecting filter, does not stay active indefinitely. It runs on energy the same way every other system in your body does. As you move through the stages of sleep onset, as your muscles soften and your breath slows and the visual noise behind your eyelids begins to take on its own strange logic, the gatekeeper reduces its watch. Then it reduces it further. And in that 5-minute corridor between full waking and full sleep, it steps aside almost entirely. That corridor is the hypnagogic window. You have heard it named throughout this book. But naming it is different from understanding what its existence means for everything you have tried before. It means the obstacle was never permanent. The gate was never locked. It was on a timer. Every canceled affirmation, every visualization that felt hollow, every identity statement that bounced back like a rejection letter, none of that was permanent refusal. It was refusal during the wrong hours. During the hours when the gatekeeper was fully staffed, fully resourced, and operating at peak capacity. But the gate opens every night, on a schedule you can predict, in a window you can now use. The version of you who stood at the mirror did not fail. You were knocking on the right door at the wrong time. This is where the reframe completes itself. The gatekeeper is not your enemy. It never was. Its entire function is to protect the identity you currently hold. It resists new inputs because its job is to maintain coherence, to keep the story of who you are consistent and intact. That is actually useful. You do not want a mind that accepts every suggestion from every direction without scrutiny. The gatekeeper keeps you stable, but stability is not the same as fixed. And a protector that steps aside every night at the same time is not an obstacle. It is an invitation. Every night, without exception, you are given access to the part of your mind that holds your deepest operating beliefs about money, about your own value, about what is possible for someone with your history. Every night, for a window of minutes, that access is unguarded. The stories that went in decades ago, the ones about scarcity, the ones about people like you, the ones that play on a loop so deep you barely hear them anymore, those stories were installed through this same window. During childhood, during stress, during sleep. They did not require your permission. They required only that the gatekeeper was down. Now you know the window exists. Now you know when it opens. Now you are going to stand at the right door at the right time. The question that carries you into the final chapter is not what to believe. You already know what you want to believe about your financial life. The question is what identity you are going to install tonight and what it will feel like 6 months from now to look back and realize the change did not start with a big decision or a dramatic moment. It started in the dark, in the quiet. In 5 minutes at the threshold of sleep, the gate is open. Chapter 14. Wealth identity is not installed, it is installed. Every culture that has ever existed left behind some version of the same story. A person stands at a threshold. Behind them is everything they have known, the familiar, the safe, the small. Before them is a different life. The question the story always asks is not whether the other side exists. The question is whether the person will cross. In every version of this story, across every language and every era, the ones who cross are not the bravest or the most prepared. They are the ones who understand that the threshold moment is brief, that the door does not stay open forever. You have spent 14 chapters approaching that threshold. Right now, in this final chapter, you are standing at it. What happens next depends entirely on what you do with a 5-minute window that opens for you every single night without asking for your permission. The gate is open. That was already there at the end of the last chapter, 3 words. And if you felt something when you heard them, that feeling was not accidental. It was recognition. Some part of you already knows what an open gate means. It means you move now, or you wait for the next time around. One unresolved question sits at the center of this chapter the whole way through. If the subconscious mind is where your identity actually lives, and if that identity determines what you earn, what you accept, and what you believe you deserve, then why does every traditional success system focus entirely on the conscious mind? Read more. Plan more, hustle more, think positively. The conscious mind gets the full treatment, and the subconscious, where the real operating system runs, gets almost nothing. Hold that question. The answer is not what you expect. Bring to mind the person you were back then 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. Not the version of yourself you wished you were. The actual version. The account balance. The feeling you had on Sunday nights. The quiet belief you carried that money was something that happened to other kinds of people. How much of that has changed? And more importantly, how much of what hasn't changed is because you didn't try hard enough, versus how much is because you were working on the wrong layer of yourself entirely? That distinction matters more than almost anything else you will encounter in a self-improvement context. There is a man named Dario who spent 4 years doing everything the productivity world told him to do. He woke up at 5 in the morning. He journaled. He read 12 books a year about wealth and discipline. He listened to every podcast he could find about building financial freedom. He was not lazy. Nobody who knew him would have called him lazy. But his bank account at the end of year 4 looked almost identical to his bank account at the beginning of year 1. Same range, same ceiling, same creeping anxiety when a large expense appeared without warning. He could describe the principles of compounding interest with precision. He could tell you exactly what a high-income skill was. He understood the theory completely, and the theory changed almost nothing. One evening near the end of year 4, Dario stopped fighting sleep during a long commute and simply let go. In that drift, in that soft, dissolving space between wake and sleep, a thought arrived that was not quite his own. You already have enough to begin. Not a motivational phrase, not something he had heard before. A quiet installation. He did not analyze it. He let it land. 6 months later, Dario had taken the first concrete financial step he had taken in 4 years. Not because he believed it more, because something underneath the belief had shifted. That is the difference between aspiration and installation. Aspiration lives in the conscious mind. It requires energy. It requires repetition under resistance. It is like trying to repaint a wall while someone is painting over your work from the other side. Installation is different. Installation happens when the opposition steps aside. When the gatekeeper, that rational, suspicious, protective filter named in the first chapter of this book as your primary obstacle, when that gatekeeper goes quiet. And it goes quiet every single night, on schedule, without fail. In the 5-minute window between waking consciousness and sleep, your subconscious becomes genuinely accessible, not metaphorically, structurally. The resistance drops because the mechanism that generates resistance is powering down for the night. The gate opens not because you convinced it to. The gate opens because that is what gates do when the guard sleeps. Now here is the answer to the question you were holding. The reason traditional success systems ignore the subconscious is not because they do not know it matters. It is because they do not have reliable access to it. Conscious willpower cannot reach below the conscious layer. Affirmations repeated in a mirror in full waking alertness hit the gatekeeper directly and bounce back with a return label that reads, not believable, but language, image, and intention delivered at the edge of sleep pass through without friction. The gatekeeper is already going. The door is already open. All you need to do is walk through. You do not earn a new identity. That is the core of what this entire book has been building toward. You do not grind your way into believing you are someone who handles money with confidence. You do not white-knuckle your way into a new financial self-image. You install it quietly, nightly, through a window that opens whether you use it or not. Every night you have spent falling asleep without intention was a missed installation, not a failure, not something to feel regret about. Simply an open gate that no one walked through. Starting tonight, you know the gate is there. Starting tonight, you know the exact window. You know what to bring to it. A single clear identity statement, not a wish, but a declaration of who you already are in the version of your life you are building toward. You know to speak it or hold it at the edge of consciousness. Not to push, not to strain, but to offer it gently to the part of your mind that is waiting to receive it. The mechanism does not require motivation. That is what makes it different from everything else you have tried. Motivation fades. Willpower depletes. Belief wavers at 3 in the morning when something goes wrong. But the hypnagogic window opens regardless of how your day went. It opens on the hard days. It opens on the days you forgot every principle in this book. It opens when you are exhausted and discouraged and have zero desire to improve anything. It opens because it is biological, not inspirational. You do not have to want it. You simply have to use it. That is the nightly mechanism you now carry with you. Not a practice that requires a perfect morning routine before it works. Not a tool that only functions when you are feeling confident. A structural feature of human consciousness that has always been there, waiting for you to notice it. One more thing, and it is important. The identity you install does not announce itself the next morning. It does not arrive with a feeling of sudden certainty. What happens is quieter and more durable than that. Choices begin to feel different. Options you would have dismissed begin to look possible. The financial ceiling you accepted without question begins to feel arbitrary rather than fixed. Not because you talked yourself into it, because something beneath talking has been rewritten, 1 5-minute window at a time. Dario did not wake up transformed. He woke up the same. And then slowly, the same started to mean something different. This is your last chapter. Which means what you do tonight is the first real act of everything that comes after. The reading is done. The understanding is done. The gate is about to open. Go to it. Let everything you have absorbed across these pages settle downward, beneath thought, beneath effort, beneath the part of you that is still assessing whether this is real. Let it settle into the layer where your actual decisions are made, where your actual self-image lives, where your actual relationship with money has always been determined. Bring one clear thought to the edge of sleep, not a plea, not a wish, a statement of who you are becoming, offered quietly to the part of you that is ready to become it. The gate does not ask if you are ready. The gate simply opens. Walk through.